because it is rather difficultly worded. And it comes at the last page of what I think is one of the finest books I have ever read. It's written by G.K. Chesterton, and it's called Orthodoxy. It is an extraordinary volume. Many of you may not realize that it was Chesterton's writings that became the last link in the conversion of C.S. Lewis himself. I'm referring to Chesterton's book, Everlasting Man. But in his book, Orthodoxy, just before he brings some marvelous thoughts to an end, particularly as he talks about the wonder that God has fused into this world and can fuse into our hearts, he raises this very fascinating question. Why do we never read in the scriptures Jesus laughed? We hear of him weeping. We hear of him upset. We hear of him sort of rebuking people. And he says, I wish somewhere it were written, and Jesus laughed. Certainly, there must be some sense of joy and mirth in the mind of God himself. But you see, as he begins to answer this, he works through an argument saying this. Follow me, please. He points out how joy is central to the Christian's life and sorrow is peripheral. Joy is central and sorrow is peripheral. The reason is that the fundamental questions of life are answered and only the peripheral ones are not answered. For the unbeliever, sorrow is central and joy is peripheral, because the fundamental questions of life for the skeptic are still unanswered. Only the peripheral ones for the skeptic may be answered. But listen to how he words it. Listen carefully. Joy, which was the small publicity of the pagan, is the gigantic secret of the Christian. And as I close this chaotic volume, I open again the strange small book from which all Christianity came. And I'm again haunted by a kind of confirmation. This tremendous figure, which fills the Gospels, towers in this respect as in every other above all the thinkers who ever thought themselves tall. His pathos was natural, almost casual. The Stoics, ancient and modern, were proud of concealing their tears. He never concealed his tears. He showed them plainly on his open face at any daily sight, such as the far sight of his native city. Yet he concealed something. Solemn supermen and imperial diplomatists are proud of restraining their anger. He did not restrain his anger. He flung furniture down the front steps of the temple and asked men how they expected to escape the damnation of hell. Yet he restrained something. I say it with reverence. There was in that shattering personality a thread that must be called shyness. There was something that he hid from all men when he went up to a mountain alone to pray. There was something that he covered constantly by abrupt silence or impetuous isolation. There was some one thing that was too great for God to show us when he walked upon our earth, and I have sometimes fancied that it was his mirth. The laughter of God. And he says, I fancy that someday when we are in his presence, it will all be opened up in a way for which there was no earthly analogy to do justice to. And I believe worship is that clue that takes us into that mirth of God. Let me begin to unravel this for you. And obviously we have limited time and limited ideas. I can't go into this in any hint of comprehensiveness, but maybe I can touch the nerve of this so that you and I can understand what it is that God really is seeking to accomplish when he calls us to worship him. The first thing he says to them as he opens this book is, I have loved you, yet you say, in what way have you loved us? I have loved you. It's that perfect tense, present implications, past action. I have loved you, yet you say, in what way have you loved us? Go back across the centuries. We could go back to the time of Abraham, when with the grandeur of his grace, he called this man, and through his loins he said, every nation of this earth will be blessed. Took him, though undeserving in himself, to make him a blessing to the world. We could go as far back as we could think of, but let us go back just about 4 centuries, because one of the most bluntly worded books of the Old Testament is given to us. I'm referring to the book of Hosea that was penned around the late 700s before Christ. Hosea was one of the most unusual prophets whose privilege it was to minister to the northern kingdom of Israel. But what was so unusual about him, he was commanded by God to go and marry a woman whose name was Gomer, and she was going to become a prostitute. So God took this holy man, commanded him to go and love Gomer, knowing that she would be a harlot and betray her trust to him. Out of that marriage were born 3 children. The first was called Jezreel, meaning judgment. The second was called Lo-Ami, meaning not my people. The third was called Lo-Ruhama, meaning no more mercy. Can you imagine living in that household? Judgment, no more mercy, not my people. Judgment, come for breakfast, no more mercy, clean up your room, not my people, when are you going to go to school? The whole home spelled the brokenness. I want you to imagine this scene with me. She had sold herself into harlotry. Can you picture this, for example? Hosea is getting ready to deliver his message to the people, and his children are living by having been abandoned by the mother while she has sold herself on the streets of town. Think of some men walking past the brothel and finding the opportunity to go into the brothel and buy the prophet's wife for a few moments of pleasure. Think then members of his congregation who are walking past the brothel on the way to go and listen to Hosea, and some taunting, sensuous individual calls out and says, would you go and tell your prophet today that we've had the pleasure of buying his wife for some moments a few days ago, we've enjoyed it, we are back again. Go and say that to him, will you? Taunting the people. I can imagine finally some of his own congregation taking him aside and saying, Hosea, we love you dearly, we respect you, we believe you're a godly man, but can you answer one thorny question to us? How can a holy man of God like you have ever been joined to a harlotous woman like that? And Hosea probably said, I've been waiting for you to ask the question, because I will answer yours after you will answer mine. How can a holy God like that love such a harlot people like us? God's love is completely unmerited. God's love completely undeserving. And as I look at this message 800 years before Malachi, I say to myself, he loved them. He showed it in such graphic terms. Why didn't they understand it? About 200 years after Hosea came a man by the name of Ezekiel. He wasn't speaking to the northern kingdom, he was speaking to the southern kingdom of Judah. And he spoke in this parable, the word of God speaking in the first person this way. I walked through the highways of this land one day, and I heard a baby crying. I went into the bushes from where the crying came, and I saw this newly born baby in the bushes, still so newly born that the afterbirth still marred its body. Its umbilical cord was only freshly severed. I took the baby to the waters nearby, and I washed its body, sprinkled it with perfume, covered it with soft pieces of cloth, and I left it with careful, compassionate care. Many, many years went by. I spied a splendidly attractive young woman. I loved her, offered her my hand in marriage. She agreed to be wedded to me. Oh, Israel, you were the little baby I rescued as I walked along the highway. You were the young woman years later who had grown up from being that little one. I loved you, desired you, and committed myself to you. Now, after years of being wedded to you, Israel, all of these in metaphorical usages, of course, he says, after years of being wedded to you, I wish I could call you a harlot. But you know what? A harlot at least defends herself by saying she is paid by her lovers to lie with them. Israel, you've become worse than that. You're paying your lovers to lie with you. 800, harlotry was the biggest charge. 586, harlotry would have been flattering. 400 BC, he says, I have loved you. And they say, in what way? You know, ladies and gentlemen, somewhere in the world of philosophy, we made a huge blunder across the centuries when we lost contact with the reality of our emotions and made human beings purely cerebral. And then in the 1950s and the 60s, the existentialist philosophers became so popular, focusing on emotion, focusing on passion, focusing on experience, and swung the pendulum to the other degree where rationality was not as important as much as acting with passion for the moment became that important. Somewhere in the middle is the balance. God has given us our emotions for a reason. Just as he has given us sensitivities to touch. When you put your hand on something that burns, you pull it away. And the reason you pull it away is you know if you keep it there, it'll burn the rest of your body. Emotions are supposed to be indicators of reality, not fabricators or framers of reality. Let me underscore this, because this is such a vital part of worship. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Abolition of Man, has as his opening chapter a strange title, Men Without Chests. Now that's a strange title. He's not talking about us fellows who are not bodybuilders, but he's got something better in mind. You know, Lewis never liked to criticize anybody, and Lewis never liked to respond to criticism. On this one occasion, he made one slender response and backed away. What was he responding to? There was a couple of writers that Lewis did not even name by their actual name. He said, let me call them Gaius and Titius, but that's not their real name. He said, they've written a book. I won't name the book. I'll call it the Green Book. They were taking issue with Lewis's teaching of children about moral theory, that children have the capacity to be taught in moral theory. And these two, Gaius and Titius, were sort of attacking that notion, and Lewis is now mildly responding to them. And this is what he basically says. He says, Gaius and Titius are trying to tell us that moral reality and our emotions have no connection. They say something like this. They take an incident from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's life, the Romantic poet, who made a comment once about two young people walking past a waterfall. And both of them commented on the waterfall. One of them said, my, isn't it sublime? And the other said, my, isn't it pretty? And Coleridge said the young man who said it was sublime was right on target. But now Gaius and Titius come around and say, there's no such thing as a sublime waterfall. It was pretty, was more accurate, because they say when your glands respond to beauty, or when your glands respond to ideas that you call good and bad, it's not because good and bad actually exist out there. It's only because our cultural conditioning provokes a glandular, a visceral response, such that, for example, if you pick up a child on the side of the road that's been hurt, and you pick that child up, certain glands start secreting juices which tell you what you have done is a good thing. You haven't actually done a good thing. It's just a glandular response. Or if you'd taken the child that was hurt and actually suffocated it to death, you didn't actually do something bad. A different set of glands secreted a different set of juices that told you you'd actually done something bad, while there was no such thing as good or bad out there. Just in case you think that's outlandish, by the way, just watch moral education in our time. Watch what teachers are instructing students about in terms of moral right and moral wrong at their youngest age. I have been on campuses and I could tell you stories that will leave you absolutely aghast as to how they're instructing young people in moral theory. That it is actually purely a cultural construct. It is a glandular response, nothing more. C.S. Lewis says these men are conveying dangerous ideas because these these men imply to me that mathematics is real, therefore my brain is real. Food is real, therefore my stomach is real. But right and wrong don't actually exist. Therefore my emotional response to those things is purely a cultural thing. He said, if these men are believed in what they are saying, they'll produce a generation of men with heads, men with stomachs, men with no heart, men without chests. No emotion. Emotion is so real. And what God is saying here is, I have loved you. And the people look at him and say, in what way? Can you imagine if that was relevant before the cross, how much more would that be relevant after the cross? My conclusion on that first thought is that you cannot worship without emotion. I didn't say emotionalism. I said emotion, because there is that bond of love. There is that relationship of love. And why, when the music is sung, when the hymns are sung and the choruses are sung, do we get stirred within us? Is because the voice is giving vent not just to an idea, but to an emotion. I have loved you. I hope you don't look at him tonight and say, in what way? You cannot worship him without emotion.
I have loved you, God said. How clearly this is seen in our day in the light of the cross. The Father sent his own Son to die for us. Let's not be like the people of Malachi's day who question God's love. The cross has settled that once and for all. As Ravi said, we cannot truly worship without true emotion, true love for God. In light of what God has done for us out of his heart, let's return to him the love of our hearts. Today's broadcast is available on CD. When ordering, ask for CD number 127, entitled Worship, A Clue to Meaning in Life. Again, that's CD number 127, entitled Worship, A Clue to Meaning in Life. If you'd like to place a credit card order, call us at 1-800-448-6766. That's 1-800-448-6766. The order line is available 24 hours a day. When you contact us, ask for a free catalog that features books, cassettes, and other materials by Ravi and his team members. If you prefer the Internet, go to rzim.org. That's rzim.org. The Online Resource Center is an interactive, user-friendly way to preview and order products. In addition, you'll find information about Ravi's ministry, essays and articles, and archived files of the Let My People Think broadcasts. Once again, that's rzim.org. If you'd like to write, address your envelope to RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010. That's RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010. In Canada, write to 50 Gervais Drive, Suite 315, Toronto, Ontario, M3C 1Z3. Please be sure to give us the call letters of the station when you contact us. Knowing which station you're listening to helps us better evaluate the effectiveness of the broadcast. This weekly program, Let My People Think, is a listener-supported radio ministry and a production of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.
With me, please, to the book of Malachi, verse 1, chapter 1. The burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, says the Lord, yet you say, in what way have you loved us? We stop right there. I have loved you, says the Lord, yet you say, in what way have you loved us? Let me begin to unravel this for you. And obviously we have limited time and limited ideas. I can't go into this in any hint of comprehensiveness, but maybe I can touch the nerve of this so that you and I can understand what it is that God really is seeking to accomplish when he calls us to worship him. The first thing he says to them as he opens this book is, I have loved you, yet you say, in what way have you loved us? I have loved you. It's that perfect tense, present implications, past action. I have loved you, yet you say, in what way have you loved us? You know, ladies and gentlemen, somewhere in the world of philosophy, We made a huge blunder across the centuries when we lost contact with the reality of our emotions and made human beings purely cerebral. And then in the 1950s and the 60s, the existentialist philosophers became so popular, focusing on emotion, focusing on passion, focusing on experience, and swung the pendulum to the other degree where rationality was not as important as much as acting with passion for the moment became that important. Somewhere in the middle is the balance. God has given us our emotions for a reason. Just as He has given us sensitivities to touch. When you put your hand on something that burns, you pull it away. And the reason you pull it away is you know if you keep it there, it'll burn the rest of your body. Emotions are supposed to be indicators of reality, not fabricators or framers of reality. Emotion is so real. And what God is saying here is, I have loved you. And the people look at Him and say, in what way? Can you imagine if that was relevant before the cross, how much more would that be relevant after the cross? My conclusion on that first thought is that you cannot worship without emotion. I didn't say emotionalism. I said emotion, because there is that bond of love. There is that relationship of love. And why, when the music is sung, when the hymns are sung and the choruses are sung, do we get stirred within us? Is because the voice is giving vent not just to an idea, but to an emotion. I have loved you. I hope you don't look at Him tonight and say, in what way? You cannot worship Him without emotion. Secondly, He says, you call me Father, where is my honor? You call me Master, where is my respect? What God is really saying to them is, how come you call me all these marvelous titles, but I don't sense any reverence from you? I don't see any obedience from you. You know, one of the things I've been so grateful for in my heritage is the birth and the land of birth that God gave to me. And every culture has its strengths. Every culture has its weaknesses and downside. One of the great strengths of the culture in which I was raised was the respect for dad and mom, for father and mother. And there were times where I can assure you, as a young rebellious heart, you could rationalize otherwise. But over all the years, I never ever lost that sense of respect and reverence for my dad and mom. You see, in the Hindi language, the word for father is pita, and the word for mother is mata. But you do not call your father pita, or you do not call your mother mata. You call your father pitaji, you call your mother mataji. Ji is purely that term of reverence and respect. The average Indian will never refer to Gandhi as Gandhi. They'll always refer to him as Gandhi Ji. Ji is that reverential term. And so when you say Pitaji, what are you saying? You're using the nearest and the dearest term to you, father or mother. But it's like daddy, sir, mother, madam. It's not just daddy or mummy. It's daddy, sir, mummy, madam. The nearest terms to you, the ones who gave you birth, and yet that sense of respect and that sense of distance. What God is really saying to the people is, you call me Pita, where is the G? You call me daddy, where is the sir? Or you call me Father, where is the holy? When you come to God and He reaches out and says, I have loved you. When I come to Him and He has reached out to me and loved me, He is still the Lord of glory. He is still my holy Father. He's still Daddy, Sir. You call me Father. Where is my honor? One of the most difficult things for me to understand in recent developments in worship, I'm beginning to wonder, have we lost that sense of reverence for Him? Think about it. It's really not meant to be critical. But I often in the morning hours, one of the hardest things for me to do is to pray sitting down. I pace the floor talking to the Lord. And even then I struggle, because I know at those moments as I'm really addressing him, that hunger and yearning comes to just bend down, to bow down before him. The most popularly translated word in the New Testament for worship is from the Greek proskunein, from which we transliterate to prostrate. There is that awe, there is that reverence. You cannot worship without emotion. You cannot worship without reverence. Thirdly, he says, you offer the lame and the blind and the sick. Is it not evil? You say the table of the Lord is contemptible. What he's really saying is, these are valueless sacrifices you're bringing to me. Why don't you try offering them to your governor and see what he would think of it? Here he's striking. Follow me, please. He's striking at the nerve of what happens when worship has lost its worth, when that which is definitive of worth is treated as worthless, where it is an insolence to bring what we are bringing and saying, here it is, the table of the Lord is contemptible. You see, you cannot worship without sacrifice. I think of all that we give the world, our time, our energy, our disciplines, our affections, and somehow we come to God and give him the leftovers on a Sunday morning or on a Wednesday night. The world has the best of the intellects, they tell us, and we don't take that intellect and give it to God. I say this to you, give him your best. Give him the best of your time. Give him the best of your substance. Give him the best of your day. You cannot worship without emotion. You cannot worship without reverence. You cannot worship without sacrifice. And fourthly and quickly, in verse 10, he says, is there not somebody here who will shut the door so that you don't offer these vain ceremonies to me and these sacrifices? What he's really saying is, you cannot worship without a purity of heart. Here are the four ingredients. You worship with your emotions, you worship with reverence, you worship with sacrifice, and you worship with purity of motive. This brings together the emotion, the conscience, the will, the intellect, all of this. And I want you to hold all of that now at the back of one set of thinking, because I'm going to now give you the bridge to find out why this is the answer to our questions that plague us so much. And I have to leap across thought here. Please follow me now. Do you know what has been the greatest pursuit of philosophy for centuries? The greatest pursuit of philosophy has been to find unity in diversity. You remember the early Greek philosophers said there were possibly four constituents to this world: earth, air, water, fire. Earth, air, water, fire. The pre-Socratic philosophers talked of these four components, but they said that doesn't answer the question, unity in diversity. What is the one thing that pulls the four of these together? That's where we get the word quintessence from. What is the fifth essence that pulls these four essences together? So the greatest pursuit of philosophy has been to find unity in diversity. It still is philosophy's pursuit. The greatest pursuit in culture is inscribed on the American coins. Every American coin says it. E pluribus unum. Out of diversity, one. Out of plurality, singularity. They are looking for a unity to bind cultures. Things that will keep us from despising one another for race or color or creed or gender. The greatest pursuit of philosophy has been unity in diversity. The greatest pursuit of culture has been unity in diversity. The greatest pursuit of education has been unity in diversity. That's what the word university means. It's looking for unity in diversity. All of the disciplines, take the whole host of disciplines across history, they are desperately looking for that which would unify all of the disciplines. You go to philosophy, you go to culture, you go to academia. The desperate search is for unity in diversity. Listen now to those magnificent words of Archbishop William Temple when he defines what worship is all about. Worship is the submission of all of our nature to God. It's the quickening of conscience by His holiness, nourishment of mind by His truth, purifying of imagination by His beauty, opening of the heart to His love, submission of will to His purpose. All this gathered up in adoration is the greatest expression of which we are capable. There is unity in diversity, finding worship to bind the diversity of the inclinations of your heart. Once we understand this, that this is that great binding, that's why I believe even in the Lord's Supper, you don't only think of history or the past. You don't only engage the truth in the present. You don't only think of the Lord's coming. While the mind is engaged and the head is bowed, the hand is holding and the mouth is tasting. All of every sense is converging into that act of the Lord's Supper. Ladies and gentlemen, in the book I end this section with these words. Worship takes the diversity of our loves and abilities and coalesces them into a direction in life. Now we can see how worship responds to guilt, for with reverence we come to Him for forgiveness. Now we can see why worship goes beyond the satisfaction of pleasure, for even pleasure has its weariness. Now we can see how worship guides our feelings, for even our feelings need to be bound and informed by the truth. Now we can see how worship needs to know who God is, for we come to Him on His terms as Daddy, Sir, or Holy Father. Now we can understand how worship counters the sense of loneliness, because loneliness cannot be dispelled by love alone. Only worship can bind all our passions, something love alone cannot do. This is the reason that worship is the supreme expression in life, the root from which life's branches grow and its expressions flower. I'll tell you something very shocking. You may find this hard to understand, and it's sometimes almost awkward to say. You know something? I thought that when you get married and you find the woman you love with all of your heart, that you would never be tempted again. I was wrong. I thought when you had the comfort of a lifestyle materially where all your needs were met, that you'd never be greedy again. I thought when you had all the dependence in your heart for God to give you strength, that you'd never be proud again. I have met many a man who claimed to love his partner and ended up in a betrayal. I met many a person extremely wealthy, still very greedy. I met many a person who talks of humility, still very proud. And all that is in the world, says the scripture writers, is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. There is only one thing I have found in my life that gives me the strength to honor my pledge to my wife, whom I love dearly more than anyone else in this globe. There's only one thing that's given me the strength to know not to be greedy for the things of this world and not to be proud even in a moment's glory. It is when worship has bound every ability and anchored it in sacredness, and it is the greatest expression of your life and mind. Quickening of conscience by His holiness, nourishment of mind by His truth, purifying of imagination by His beauty, opening of the heart to His love, submission of will to His purpose. All this gathered up in adoration are the greatest expressions of which we are capable. Ladies and gentlemen, it is because of that deep conviction of worship, there are some movies I will never see, however good they may be. There are some books I will never crack open, however greatly written they may be. There are some sights I will shut my eyes to and turn away from, however alluring they may be. There are some desires that need to be stifled in their first instance, however imaginative and marvelous that trail may be. You back away because your life is bound by a sacred commitment to God, and worship has pulled my life together, as I'm sure it has yours, when you bring emotion, will, conscience, everything under His care and under His control. You see, I can bring this to an application in two options. Application number one is this: if you do not know how to worship Him in spirit and in truth, please hear me, even God will disappoint you. Because you will end up using Him. You will end up not really coming on His terms. That's why He said, you've sniffed at it and said, what a weariness it is. There's a barrenness in our world today because people do not know how to worship. The other application is very straightforward. When you understand how worship binds, how worship bestows dignity to every human being, and how worship brings purpose, how worship gives sacredness so that you see those which will not take you into the profane, so that you don't utter words that profane in themselves, that your life, your body, your mind, your goals, your ambitions are all governed by this binding factor of worship. Then you find out that worship is not a moment, it is not an hour, it is not a service. That is only a community expression when we come. You see, God does not live in buildings, as He pointed out to Stephen. We do not go to the temple, we take the temples with us. He makes this His home. Once you understand the ramifications of this, then you understand that worship is coextensive with life. It is a moment-by-moment expression, not just in a punctiliar or a momentary sense. It takes you every moment. Have you seen the movie Chariots of Fire years ago? It's the true story of two runners, Harold Abrams, who ran for personal glory, Eric Liddell, the Scottish runner, who ran for the glory of God. In the early part of the movie, Harold Abrams is being asked by a friend, Montague. Harold Abrams, cocky, sure, confident. And Montague looks at him and says, I hate losing, Harold. How about you? He says, I don't know. I have never lost. Towards the end of the movie, Harold Abrams is being massaged before this great run of his, and I think it is the 1924 Olympics in Paris. And Harold Abrams is getting ready, and Montague's already run and already lost. And Eric Liddell had not run on his key event because the heats were going to be on the Lord's Day. He changed his event and was going to run in the 400 meters as a change so that he could live with his conviction, which he was not foisting on anyone else, but in his mind, he did not want to abuse the Lord's Day, and he kept that as a firm principle. But now Abrams is about to run the 100 meters. Liddell is not running in it. And Montague looks at him and he asks him if he's ready. Do you know what he says? He says, you know, Montague, I used to be afraid to lose, but now I'm afraid to win because I have 10 seconds in which to prove the reason for my existence, and even then I'm not sure I will. He ran the 100, he won it, went out in despondency. He'd reached the climactic goal of pleasure in his life. It ultimately let him down. He had nothing left to celebrate. There was a downer after even his victory. Liddell. His sister said to him, Eric, you're giving up so much. He says, why are you giving up so much for this? And he put his hands gently on her shoulders. He says, Jenny, 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 God has made me for a purpose, but He's also made me fast. And when I run, I feel His pleasure. When he started to run the 400 meters, the American athlete Jackson Schultz walked over to him and gave him a piece of paper. And Eric opened it just before the gun was sounded, and it said, "Them that honor me will I also honor, says the Lord." Eric clasped that piece of paper and breasted that tape as a winner. He went on as a missionary to China, died ultimately there of a tumor. But I've always remembered his words: God's made me for a purpose for China, but he's also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, worship is coextensive with life. And Eric ran with his hands flailing, looking to the heavens. To him, even his running was an expression of worship to God. Whatever you do, you may work in a computer, you may be a ditch digger, you may work in a cemetery, you may be the executive of a corporation, you may be a homemaker, you may be a student. Do all to the glory of God and give that as an expression of worship to him. Will you listen to these words as I now have to close? The words of Charles Wesley, which I have made my prayer. During my days in Cambridge, I used to run there in the mornings and always uttered this prayer as I would run. O thou who camest from above, the pure celestial fire to impart, kindle a flame of sacred love on the mean altar of my heart. There let it for thy glory burn with inextinguishable blaze, and trembling to its source return in humble prayer and fervent praise. Jesus, confirm my heart's desire to work and speak and think for thee. Still let me guard the holy fire, and still stir up thy gift in me. Ready for all thy perfect will, my acts of faith and love repeat, till death thy endless mercy seal, and make my sacrifice complete. Bring your life tonight to Christ in worship. You will get a glimpse of his mirth and his laughter. God will give that laughter to your heart as a foretaste of what heaven itself will offer to you and me.
In his letter to the Romans, the Apostle Paul wrote, "I urge you, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. This is your spiritual act of worship." Ravi challenged us to see worship as a way to approach life, flowing out of a relationship with God, and not just in our music. Indeed, God created us to worship him, to know him. Only then will we find life's ultimate meaning. Today's broadcast is available on CD. When ordering, ask for CD number 127, entitled Worship, A Clue to Meaning in Life. Again, that's CD number 127, entitled Worship, A Clue to Meaning in Life. If you'd like to place a credit card order, call us at 1-800